January 1324. Cairo, Egypt. The morning air along the Nile is sharp with dust and incense, and the markets are already alive. Bronze scales clinking, copper coins sliding across wooden tables, merchants shouting prices in dinars as caravans arrive from Damascus and Alexandria. Gold is flowing steadily through the city. Predictable, controlled, until it isn't. By midday, the sound changes. Not the normal rhythm of trade, but the gasp of disbelief. Camel bells ring without stopping. Hooves strike stone in endless succession. Slaves dressed in Persian silk carry staffs of solid gold. Behind them, hundreds of attendants distribute gold dust freely. So freely that money changers at Khan el-Khalili look at one another in fear, not joy. Because when too much money enters a market at once, wealth doesn't rise, it collapses. At the center of this moving earthquake of wealth is Mansa Musa, emperor of the Mali Empire, still considered by modern economists to be the richest individual in recorded history, with wealth estimated today at over $400 billion adjusted for inflation. And this is where the first lesson begins. But before the shockwaves, you have to understand how Musa became inevitable. In every age, wealth decides who rises and who falls. These are the hidden stories behind fortunes, empires, and collapses. Welcome to Atlas Money Chronicles. Mansa Musa didn't inherit a weak kingdom. He inherited a system. By the early 1300s, Mali controlled the world's most valuable choke points, the Bambuk and Beret gold field, responsible for nearly half of the old world's gold supply. Europe didn't mint gold coins without West African metal. Islamic banks in Cairo depended on it. Phoenician traders quietly built fortunes on it. But Mali didn't rush gold into the market. They controlled flow, not just ownership. Gold dust was taxed. Nuggets were restricted to royal possession. Trade routes across the Sahara were secured with military outposts and contractual protection. This wasn't luck, it was policy. Lesson 1. Wealth isn't what you own. It's what you control access to. Modern parallels are everywhere. Oil cartels, semiconductor fab, cloud infrastructure. You don't need to own everything. You need to sit at the bottleneck. Mansa Musa sat at the narrowest one on earth. When he became emperor around 1312, he didn't immediately display wealth. Instead, he consolidated logistics. Caravans were standardized, gold weights regulated, trade contracts enforced through Islamic court, quiet system, massive power. And then, he did the unthinkable. He decided to go on Hajj. The pilgrimage to Mecca was not just religious. In the 14th century, it was a global financial announcement. Every ruler who made the journey was signaling legitimacy to the Islamic world's banking elite. Cairo, Medina, Mecca, these weren't just holy cities, they were capital hubs. Musa didn't go quietly. He traveled with 60,000 people, including soldiers, scholars, merchants, and slaves, each carrying gold. Some sources estimate 12 tons of gold moved with him. As the caravan entered Cairo, Musa began giving gold away to the poor, to merchants, to mosque builders, to officials. At first, the city celebrated. Then prices began to rise. Gold lost value. Bread doubled. Rents surged. Salaries couldn't keep up. For over a decade, Egypt struggled with inflation directly traced to Musa's generosity. This wasn't malice. It was misunderstanding. Lesson number 2. Liquidity without restraint destroys value, even when intentions are good. You see this today when stimulus floods markets too fast, when venture capital overfunds startups with no revenue, when retail traders pile into a single asset without understanding depth. Money is powerful, but timing is everything. Even Musa realized the damage. On his return trip, he did something no ruler had ever done before. He borrowed gold back from Cairo's moneylenders at high interest, attempting to pull excess supply out of circulation. This wasn't a naive king. This was a man learning macroeconomics in real time, and the world was watching. European cartographers began marking Mali on maps for the first time, with Musa seated on a throne, holding a gold nugget. Trade delegations followed his route home. Scholars and architects would soon arrive in Timbuktu. Power attracts attention. Attention attracts capital. And capital, when unmanaged, demands discipline. If this story already feels uncomfortably modern, that's because it is. And if you're starting to see how ancient empires mirror today's financial giants, make sure you subscribe to Atlas Money Chronicles, because every episode uncovers the patterns history keeps repeating. But Cairo was only the opening act, because the real legacy of Mansa Musa wasn't how much gold he gave away. It was how he converted raw wealth into permanent power. And that transformation begins next. The world had just watched gold destabilize Cairo. Prices spiraled. Merchants cursed the day Mansa Musa arrived. But when the caravan turned south, and disappeared back into the Sahara. Something far more dangerous followed him home. Attention. By 1325, trade winds carried Musa's name into Venetian counting houses, Andalusian universities, and the private correspondence of Genoese bankers. Mali was no longer a rumor at the edge of the map. It was a destination. And Mansa Musa understood something most rulers never grasp. Wealth that isn't institutionalized evaporates. Gold can be stolen. Land can be invaded. Armies can fail. But systems, if built correctly, outlive kings. When Musa returned to Niamey, the capital of Mali, he didn't celebrate. He reorganized. Caravans were redirected. Taxation was rewritten. Judges trained in Islamic law were installed along major trade corridors. And then came the most important decision of his reign. He invested in knowledge infrastructure. Lesson number 3. The most durable wealth is intellectual capital. In 14th century terms, this meant scholars. Musa invited architects from Cairo, poets from Andalusia, jurists from Mecca. Among them was Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, a Granadan architect who would reshape West African urban design, using local mud brick reinforced with timber. Al-Sahili helped construct mosques, palaces, and universities that were not only beautiful but permanent. The most famous of these was in Timbuktu. At the time, Timbuktu was a dusty trade post, useful but unremarkable. Musa turned it into a magnet. He expanded the Sankor Mosque, transforming it into a university complex, not symbolic, functional. Salaried scholars, endowment, libraries, legal faculties, astronomy, mathematics, theology. Manuscripts became currency. By the mid-1300s, Timbuktu housed hundreds of thousands of texts, many imported at immense cost. Books were more valuable than gold. Contracts were written, accounts recorded, knowledge compounded. This is how power locks itself in place. Modern parallels are obvious. Silicon Valley didn't rise on cash alone. It rose on universities, patents, research grants, and talent clustering. Wall Street isn't just money, it's regulation, education, and access. Musa wasn't building monuments. He was building moats. But Musa didn't stop at culture. He restructured trade itself. Salt from Tagaza, gold from Bahrain, ivory, slaves, textiles, all passed through Mali. But now under standardized weights, state taxation, and military protection. Merchants paid toll, but gained safety. This created what modern economists call transaction certainty. Lesson number 4. Markets thrive not on freedom, but on trust enforced by power. Without enforcement, trade collapses into risk premium. With it, margins stabilize. Mali became the safest corridor between North Africa and the Atlantic world. European traders couldn't access it directly, but they felt it. Gold supply became predictable. Islamic banks extended credit with confidence. Mali became embedded in global finance without needing ships or banks. And then came the most underestimated move of all. Musa institutionalized religious legitimacy. By aligning Mali with Islamic law, he connected his empire to a vast, pre-existing financial network. Sharia courts enforced contracts across borders. Trust extended beyond ethnicity or tribe. This wasn't conversion for faith alone. It was integration. Today, we call this regulatory alignment. When nations adopt international standards, accounting rules, banking regulations, legal framework, they unlock capital flows. Musa did this 700 years ago. But even with all this brilliance, no system is invincible, because institutions depend on succession. And when power passes from a singular mind into weaker hands, cracks form. Mansa Musa died around 1337. His successors inherited gold, cities, scholars, but not his discipline. Spending rose, control weakened, trade routes shifted. By the 15th century, Portuguese ships bypassed Saharan routes entirely. The bottleneck moved from desert to sea, and Mali faded. Which brings us to the final lesson, the one history repeats most brutally. If you're seeing echoes of modern empires in this story, corporations, countries, even personal fortune, you're exactly where you should be. Subscribe to Atlas Money Chronicles, because the final lesson from Mansa Musa explains why even the greatest wealth in history eventually dissolves, and how yours doesn't have to. Mali's roads still carried gold, scholars still debated under the Sankor Mosque, and caravans still crossed the Sahara. But something subtle had changed. The silence of discipline was gone. By the late 14th century, the empire was rich and unfocused. This is where the final and most uncomfortable lesson from the richest man in history emerges. September 1390. Off the coast of West Africa, Portuguese caravels cut through the Atlantic swell, their sails snapping in unfamiliar wind. These ships aren't carrying gold yet. They're carrying something more dangerous: optionality. The Sahara was no longer the only route. Sea lanes could bypass Mali entirely. No toll, no court, no caravan. Mali didn't lose its gold field. It lost its strategic position. Lesson number 5. Wealth that doesn't adapt to structural change becomes becomes invisible. Mansa Musa had mastered his era's constraints. His successors assumed those constraints were permanent. They weren't. History is ruthless this way. It doesn't destroy wealth head-on. It moves the game board. The United States has seen this before. Railroads replaced canals. Highways replaced rail hubs. Digital payments bypassed banks. Cloud computing erased data moats. Every empire believes its advantage is natural until it isn't. Mali's bureaucracy grew heavier. Its spending less precise. Gold remained plentiful, but leverage vanished. By the time leaders recognized the shift, power had already migrated elsewhere. This is the final truth Mansa Musa's life leaves behind. No fortune survives without reinvestment in relevance. Not gold, not companies, not nations, not you. And yet, Musa's story is not a tragedy. Because while Mali faded, his blueprint didn't. Control bottleneck, manage liquidity, convert wealth into institutions, align with global systems, adapt faster than the map redraws itself. These principles built the richest empire of its age, and they still govern capital today. If you're building wealth, investing, or simply trying to understand why money flows where it does, history isn't entertainment, it's instruction. And if this story changed how you see money, power, and time, make sure you subscribe. Because here at Atlas Money Chronicles, every story reveals the truth behind money, power, and history. Thanks for watching Atlas Money Chronicles, where every story reveals the truth behind money, power, and history.